New Prague, like many communities, grew from modest beginnings. The first settlers arrived to the area in 1856. Like most pioneers to a new frontier, they brought little with them. Money was scarce, and they depended on barter. Although many of the earliest settlers were drawn to the area for the rich farmland, these first farms were small by modern standards, and farmers grew only what they would consume. With the completion of the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad through New Prague in 1877, local farmers became engaged in cash crop farming. The community emerged into a trading center for the area's farmers as they began to sell their wheat in New Prague. Business opportunity increased as these farmers shopped in town. The capital needed to start many of the earliest businesses was scarce, and the need for a bank and note circulation became apparent. A group of investors from the neighboring communities of Jordan and Shakopee seized the opportunity and established the Bank of New Prague in 1883. The investors included David Howe, Horace Straight, John Klinkhammer, and James Foss. Straight and Howe were business owners in Shakopee. Straight in mercantile, and Howe owned several drugstores in Shakopee and area towns. Straight, at one point, was involved in 4 national banks and several state banks. Howe organized the Bank of Shakopee in 1863, and eventually helped establish the Carver County Bank, the Lyon County Bank, the Bank of Belle Plaine, and the Scott County Bank of Jordan. When these businessmen decided to open a bank in New Prague, they were joined by Michael Schreiner of Jordan. Schreiner had graduated from St. John's University in 1882 and began working in the Scott County Bank of Jordan. The Bank of New Prague opened its doors on November 4, 1883 with a capital of $15,000. 2 years after the bank opened, Joseph Mertz and Leonard Schneiderhan bought out all of the original investors except Michael Schreiner. When the bank opened in 1883, the town's population was about 380, and by 1890, New Prague's population had more than doubled to 955. The town continued to grow as a wheat buying depot, and grain elevators sprung up along the lines of the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad. The community was thriving. An article in the New Prague Times in 1895 boasted that 500 to 600 teams of horses were seen on Main Street every day this past week. New Prague's economy received a major boost in 1896 when the city's largest manufacturing firm, the New Prague Flouring Mill, was completed by Francis Bean. After just a few years of operation, Bean couldn't pay for the wheat brought to the mill. When Michael Schreiner, then president of the Bank of New Prague, heard of the financial woes, he approached Bean. Schreiner was terrified of the prospect of New Prague losing over 100 jobs, and worked to resolve the situation. The bank financed Bean by taking a chattel mortgage on the grain shipments. Bean was able to keep the mill going and eventually prosper. The 1890s were a difficult period for banking and business, and farm commodity prices reached an all-time low. Many banks were liquidated during this period. As area banks liquidated, depositors turned to the stability of the Bank of New Prague. A new 2-story block building was completed in 1903. The state of Minnesota was doing away with private banks, increasingly bringing banks under state regulation. With capital of $25,000, the Bank of New Prague became the State Bank of New Prague in 1904. Incidentally, it was in the same year a national bank was established in New Prague as well. Between 1904 and 1925, the State Bank experienced remarkable growth. Progress in diversified dairy farming helped the area's farmers, and industrial activity in New Prague contributed to the town's economic development. The State Bank remodeled its facilities in 1925 to reflect the increased prosperity of the city. Much of the interior of the bank was done in marble, and its vault had a 12-inch steel door which was able to withstand the attack of a blowtorch for 20 continuous hours. Assets of the state bank continued to grow throughout the 1920s, and on the eve of the stock market crash, the state bank had assets of nearly $1.2 million. This growth quickly came to a halt. The Great Depression began to take its toll on Minnesota's banks. In 1921, Minnesota had 1,160 state banks, and just 10 years later, only 675 remained. In 1933, the 50th year of the state bank, the Depression had tightened its grip. Because of the number of bank failures, President Franklin Roosevelt declared the national bank holiday. All of the nation's banks were closed beginning on March 6, 1933. On March 14, 1933, a Western Union telegram was sent by the Commission of Banks informing officials at the State Bank of New Prague that the bank could reopen for business on Wednesday, March 15th. Although the state bank survived the worst, in 1933 the bank claimed assets of $681,000, representing half of its peak value in 1929. Following 1933, growth was slow but steady, and by the close of the decade, the bank had assets of $800,000. During World War II, the state bank played its patriotic duty. They ran weekly advertisements in the New Prague Times promoting war mobilization and conservation. They also offered ration banking. Local retailers would redeem their used ration coupons at the state bank. Lucille Nicolai, who began her employment at the state bank following her graduation from New Prague High School in 1940, recalls the bonfires they would hold burning the used ration coupons. In 1958, the bank celebrated its 75th year of operation. The bank, which had grown to include assets of $3.5 million, marked the anniversary by remodeling its Main Street building with a modern exterior. In 1969, the state bank claimed it was one of the first banks in the country to offer drive-up banking. When the service was first offered, they had no space available adjacent to the bank building. The drive-up facility was installed across Main Street from the bank building in the alley between Woods' Bar and Fleetcheck's Meat Market. Because Main Street was also a state highway, the bank had to apply for a permit to install the tunnel under the street. Occasionally, when a deposit included too many coins, the canister would get stuck beneath Main Street. It was in the same year that the bank was proud to announce they now offered 51.5 hours of weekly full-service banking, including the convenience of a walk-up window open before and after bank hours and extended lobby hours on Friday evenings. By 1970, the Chamber of Commerce had decided to switch retail night shopping hours from Friday to Monday. The bank decided to move its later lobby hours to Thursday nights instead, allowing employees an opportunity to attend community events on Friday evenings. Limited space for growth on Main Street prompted the board to look for more space. The bank had been in the same location since 1883. Construction began in September of 1972 on the site that had been occupied by the Opera House since 1887. The doors of its Central Avenue North location opened on August 11, 1973. In addition to providing financial service, the bank included a message center displaying the time, temperature, and community and school events. In 1983, the bank celebrated its 100th anniversary. The bank had grown to include assets of $118 million. Lucille Nicolai, an employee of the bank for over 68 years, said the biggest change has been the technology. All documentation was done manually versus the automation today. In the last decade, the greatest growth in New Prague has occurred on the east side of the community, and the state bank's move represents its interest in growing with the community. Groundbreaking for the new facility began in June of 2007. The state bank has been part of the community for 125 years. In that time, it has witnessed the growth of New Prague from a settlement of 400 people to a city of nearly 7,000. The stately design of the new state bank demonstrates its strength and commitment to the future development of New Prague.